Okay, welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, J.R. Stewart.
And this is your co host, Tommy Duncan. It is Wednesday night, May the 18th, 2022, Jimmy. And if it is Wednesday night,
It is Black Men Speak. So let's give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music. And if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel and on Facebook to help our numbers out. And from there, Tom, won't you introduce the topic and all these great men that we have as guests?
all right, folks, we have a very special show for you tonight. We have an august panel of subject matter experts in a broad variety of areas, folks. But what brought us here tonight, unfortunately, is a tragedy that happened this past Saturday in Buffalo, New York, where we had an unfortunate shooting at a grocery store in the local community. And we're going to talk about why we think it happened and what we think we need to do about it, getting towards some answers. But in the interest of time, folks, because we do want to be respectful of your time, I'm going to introduce each of our speakers today. So when I introduce them, they will acknowledge themselves, and then we will learn a little bit more about them as we get into the conversation and then get to some answers. First, we'll start off with Reverend Dr. J. Augustine, the pastor of St. Joseph AME Church in Durham, North Carolina. Welcome, Brother Augustine.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
All right, thank you for being here tonight. We have Mr. James Hawthorne, who is the former assistant police chief at the city of Arlington, and also is a police chief at the Cedar Hill Independent School District, and I believe also an entrepreneur now.
Yeah, yes. Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, all right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Next, we have Mr. Jeff Trevillian, who is a county commissioner in Precinct 1 of Travis County, which is in the Austin, Texas area.
Good evening.
All right, thank you for joining us tonight. And we have one of our returning panelists and guests, Mr. Charles O'Neill, chairman of the board of directors of the U.S. Black Chambers.
God bless you. Thanks. Good to see you guys.
Welcome back. Welcome back for
Back,
sure.
yes.
We have Mr. Anton Lucky, who is the president of CEO of Urban Specialists. He is also an activist, advocate, author, and a man of many trades.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here. Can y'all hear me good?
Yes, sir.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And definitely last but not least, we have Mr. Mark McYoung, who is a national violence and self-defense consultant and expert.
Thank you for having me this evening.
All right. So we are looking forward to having a great conversation this evening. So let's get right down to it. It's been
Hey,
4
Tom.
days now. Yes, sir.
Before we get started, why don't we do this? Because there may be some people on the line who really are not that familiar with the story.
Sure.
Why don't we play clip one and just show everyone what the show is going to be about tonight?
Okay. That sounds good.
An 18-year-old white male has been arrested and charged with first-degree murder for a mass shooting at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, in what authorities called an act of racially motivated violent extremism. Authorities say at least 10 people have been reported dead from the shooting, which took place in a predominantly black neighborhood in Buffalo on Saturday afternoon. Buffalo Police Commissioner Joseph Gramaglia said the suspect was armed with an assault-style rifle and body armor when he opened fire in the parking lot while live streaming the attack on Twitch.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Jimmy. And, you know, in reverence to those who have lost loved ones during this tragic incident, for those who've lost lives, loved ones, and those who are still in the hospital, hopefully recovering, can we just take maybe 30 seconds of silence to honor those who have lost their lives and for those who are still trying to recover? All right. We want to thank all of our panelists today. We want to thank all of our audience. And if nothing else, we want to ask that you continue to pray for those families who are still struggling through this crisis and the communities in Buffalo, New York, and in the surrounding area pertaining to what has happened this weekend. Hopefully, we can share some things here today that will help channel some of the raw energy and emotion that I think all of us have been feeling as a result of this. But let's start with this. It's been 4 days since Saturday, give or take, since this mass shooting in Buffalo, New York. And I want to get a couple of you guys' thoughts in no particular order as to where you think the country is right now, Anton. You're kind of, grassroots. You do a lot of different things. You're connected with a lot of different people. And so I know you've been hearing a lot about this. So I want to get a couple of you guys' thoughts on where the country is right now after this tragic event. Starting off with you, Anton.
Yes, and I'll be brief, and thank you. I think right now, again, with this senseless tragedy, that we take 10 steps back, because again, here you have innocent Black people who've been targeted. They lose their life senselessly to this system that prepares and target Black bodies. So I think we're in a dark place right now. I think a lot of us is trying to figure out, like why, and asking these questions, trying to define it. But I still believe I gotta remain optimistic that we have within us the ability to rise above this. But again, I think we're all at a loss of words for this tragedy that'll happen again.
Gotcha. And being an expert in violence, being in an environment growing up, Mark, where you've probably seen a lot of violence. We've all seen it, but some of us, have seen it on TV. Some of us may have gotten into a couple of fights like I did when we were in school. But when you have something like this and you have an entire community of folks that are hit like this, what are the emotions and the shock waves that you've seen by being an expert in this area that affects America? What are your thoughts on this, Mark?
Well, we're in trouble. And the thing is, we really do need to start talking and interfacing with each other and finding a solution, or finding ways that we can coexist. And I mean, unfortunately, the drive has been to separate us and keep us apart. And that goes nowhere good.
Gotcha. I understand. And when you look at it from there's a statement, Jeff, they say that all politics is local. And a lot of times we have a tendency to, what's going on in D.C.? What is the president doing? What is Congress doing? And that is part of the narrative from a broader perspective. But when you look at this, we're talking about this is affecting people at the grassroots level. And so it points to local politics, Jeff. When you see something like this, and I know that there are things, maybe nothing of this magnitude recently, but when you look at the political rank and file and how this affects them and the community, what are your thoughts on this? What did you feel when this was happening? And it looks like Jeff may have fallen off there, so I am going to navigate now to Reverend Dr. J. Augustine, because when you look at grassroots in the Black community, it doesn't get probably any closer than the Black church, which is the channel that our value systems come from. Tell me what you see. Tell me about what your congregation is talking about, what you're thinking about, and what you're having to deal with. Reverend.
What a time of mourning, but unfortunately, what a time of immeasurable familiarity. For me, as a minister, and in particular as an AME minister, this is exactly reminiscent of June 2015, when a sick white racist, a sick Christian nationalist, a white Christian nationalist, decided he would target Mother Emanuel AME Church, and he snuffed out one of our fraternity brothers, I might add, who was the senior minister of the church at the time, as well as 8 congregants who were participating in a Bible study. That was a very targeted attack. The attacker, the assassin, knew exactly where he was going. He knew the history and the significance of the place he was going. And this tragedy we had on Saturday, it's a direct parallel, because this gentleman drove more than 200 miles, as I understand, targeted by zip code, this area, the most primarily African-American part of Buffalo, and went to the only grocery store in the area to get a cross section of residents and population. How very sick. This is a familiar refrain for us. America is divided by culture. America is divided politically. There's so many factions within the church. We're looking at a Second Amendment culture that says guns don't kill people, people kill people. But I would think in this case, this is another feather in the hat for legislation for national gun control. I believe Congress needs to act. I believe the Black church needs to act. I believe with respect to the area that clearly is a food desert, I would hope that the church will respond in kind, and hopefully we can help others set up a community development corporation, something that will exist in perpetuity, but something that will allow small business owners in that area to come back and claim that turf to help to address the issue of food scarcity. The church can respond collectively, and I hope Congress will respond collectively with national gun control legislation.
Gotcha. So we have Mr. Trevillian back. Thank you for coming back. And tell us a little bit about what your thoughts were as a municipal, someone who governs a group of people at the local level when something like this happens. What comes to mind? You're on mute. See if we have you there. Check to make sure that you're not on mute. We still can't hear you. Okay. While we're doing this, let's see if we can get that taken care of, because the audio is off on yours. Let's talk a little bit about the law enforcement perspective on this, Brother Hawthorne, and you've been on this show before, and we've kind of talked about a couple of different issues. But we look at the law enforcement response on this particular incident. There are some folks who just kind of looked at it, and there are other folks who was like, this guy just shot 10 people. And it was very targeted, very directed in terms of what he was trying to do. Unfortunately, it targeted what we would consider to be a very vulnerable community. What are your thoughts on the law enforcement response at the incident, and what were they within their power to do to address an issue like this?
Well, from what I saw, all I know is what I've seen on television, in regards to the response. What I think from a law enforcement perspective, I know there, and all of you guys know, because there's been a lot of conversation about it, but one of the biggest threats to law enforcement right now is this push for white nationalism. And that is a huge issue that we are dealing with in terms of domestic terrorism in the country. And I think from that perspective, I don't doubt that there are a lot of resources mobilized around this. But, from my perspective, I do think that there could be a whole lot more resources devoted to this particular issue. And I hate to say this, but I believe it's true. If this issue were involving people of color that were perpetrating acts against other people, I think there would be much more of an aggressive response with the intel and infiltration tactics and all of those other things to kind of snuff out those kind of operations and those kind of activities. And I don't know that we are seeing the same level of response as it addresses domestic terrorism and issues associated with this kind of thing. It's hard to say just based on a TV shot. You see somebody being taken into custody, and I've all heard the conversation around that. Hey, if this guy was a different color, he wouldn't be taken into custody quite the way that he was.
Gotcha.
But
dare I say, if he were black and he had gone to a grocery store in an affluent community, an affluent white community, I'm sorry, I don't believe he would be living right now. Maybe it's just me. I don't know that he would be living right now. 4 times out of 5.
Yeah. And again, I don't know the circumstances on how they encountered him. If they encountered him in the act of shooting, or if he dropped the gun up, gave himself up, hands up. You certainly would want, from a law enforcement perspective, you would certainly want to have somebody gunned down with their hands up, giving up. He
was surrendering.
Yes.
Yeah, he
yes,
surrendered himself.
Yeah,
But,
so
you're right. But
I don't have any real issue with the way that they brought him into custody. If that was the situation, because they're certainly critical of law enforcement if they had gunned him down with his hands up.
Gotcha. Well, we've seen a lot of folks who've been gunned down, unfortunately, with their hands up and unarmed. Brother Trevillian, can we hear you? Are you back with us? It looks like we still don't have the audio. Jimmy,
can I lift up something in response, please?
Yes, you can.
I deeply appreciate, Sheriff, and I hope I didn't butcher the title. I apologize, but I deeply appreciate the reference to domestic terrorism and white Christian nationalism is what I call it. It is from a theological position. I recognize it does not emanate from Scripture, but it is a philosophical or political framework that puts the United States on par, sort of a parallel with the children of Israel, in saying that this is God's chosen nation and the hand of God is on the United States, as it was with Israel. But in this case, American exceptionalism says that hand of God is on the country to the exclusion of others. So some kind of way America is different. In the Christian nationalist perspective, again, it's not a theological framework. It is a political framework of a very violent us versus them. And if you are not a part of the original us, that means blacks, you're not welcome. That means immigrants, you're not welcome. That means Jews, you're not welcome. And it can be very violent and revolting. We saw it on full display on January 6th with T-shirts and insignia that Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president. We saw it on display here because the attacks in Buffalo were undergirded by this great replacement theory that whites are somehow there's more of a value associated with that social construct of race than it is with blacks, with Mexicans, with Jews, or what have you. So there was a very violent, obviously, turn against African Americans, a very targeted turn. It is the most problematic domestic issue that I think we're going to have to deal with for at least the next decade to come.
And I know that there have been some reference points, by the FBI. Okay, this is the government that states that white domestic terrorism is the number one issue that we have to address, and this has been for years. But Mr. O'Neill, let's talk a little bit about the media spin on this. I know that you have a business background with the Black Chambers, but you also have a pretty robust background with the media. What are your thoughts on the media coverage on this in terms of and Jimmy, you and I talk about this, the sensationalization of certain things for profit, so to speak, and what the media spin. What is your analysis of what we've gotten thus far? Too much, not enough, perverted in a certain area? What are your thoughts on this from your media background? And I think we might not be able to hear you right now, Mr. O'Neill.
Well, let's see. I think
there we go.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay,
let's start off with the medium that we're working through now, and that is Black Men Speak, right? And we're using the collective wisdom and brain power in this medium, in this forum, to explain away white racism. That's what we see in the media now. The broad mainstream media has taken the opportunity to explain away all of the various kinds of manifestations that this Buffalo incident just
briefly, and I say briefly unpack that. How is, when you say explain away white racism, briefly explain that.
Well, the first thing was he was a teenager, just was a misguided youth. He had somehow become radicalized. That meant that somebody else forced him into these behaviors. We don't, again, back to he was taken in unharmed. We know that that's not the case. It had the shooter been black, and so again, it's so difficult, certainly for me as a black man, to use brain cells to explain white racism. I can't do it. I don't know why they act the way that they do, and so it's hard for me to do that. And so I think it would be difficult for us in this forum to explain how the long-standing history of American media portrayals of black folk, interactions with black communities across a period of time have always been used to denigrate. In fact, the founding of the first black newspaper was Freedom's Journal in New York was, we wish to speak, too long have others spoken for us. We wish to speak, plead our own cause. And it was because of the negative characterizations of the Black community in New York that Freedom's Journal needed to be published so that we could tell our own story. And so in this forum, in Black Men Speak, and I will be brief, in this forum, I think that the more efficient use of this collective brain power is the solutions. What do we do?
Correct.
What do we do? I mean, it's so, and I know you're going to get to that as we work through this conversation, but all of the explanations that are needed about why white people do what they do are, I can't do that one.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And I think, Brother Trevillian,
I can do it, Charles, but that'll
are
be
you back
another
with me,
show.
Brother Trevillian? Can we hear you? Jeff, are you there? It looks like you fell off again. I'm sorry, Jimmy. We'll wait.
I was just answering Brother Charles. I was letting him know that I can answer it, but that would be another show. It would take too long.
We're gonna have a separate show.
That one too.
Let's move forward. The culture of violence and violenceism in America. Have we not just outright become numb to violence? Is America? I'm not saying that it's not a big deal when it happens, because obviously we talk about mass media, and
it's a selective big deal, Tom.
Yes, it is. Gotcha. I think we may have a caller, so give me just a second. Black Men Speak. This is Tommy Duncan. Who's speaking? Where are you from? And do you have a comment? Okay, it looks like someone was trying to call in, but they had something going on in the background, so maybe they'll call back. Okay. Has America become numb, and is violence not becoming irrelevant, but have we reached a point where it's just a part of the culture and we're just having to deal with it, and everything else is lip service? What are your thoughts about that first, Mark?
Actually, the biggest problem is most of what people think they know about a subject isn't what it is. Now, for the record, I looked into what I call the savage right about 6 years ago.
All right.
And I mean, when they talk about the white nationalism, most people talk about alt-right or, white supremacy. I looked into, and honestly, it was diving into a cesspool. Okay. I mean, hardcore killing. Be afraid of these people. Okay. They are real. They are a danger. Okay. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is they are not that many. The problem that we're dealing with here is that lumping everybody together and saying that they all have the same motives. When I went in there, I discovered that what I call the savage right has 5 core ideologies that they mix and match. And each group has their own particular blend. And those are anti-government, okay? Economic. They are rabidly anti-Marxist as a general rule. Anti-globalization, which some people call nationalism. Religious, as you addressed, Reverend, and race. Now mix and match and find out what these guys are, and you discover that most of these crazies, and they are crazies, are like ex-military. They're not lone gunmen with a mishmash manifest. Okay. They are professional soldiers who got screwed over by the military, and they're pissed.
And they want somebody to blame?
Oh, yeah. And they want targets. And if these people decide to start stacking bodies, the carnage will be horrible. Now, have we become immune to violence?
Not immune per se, but more numb. I think there's a difference.
Okay, let's go with numb. That works. We keep on getting told these stories rather than what's actually happening. And, there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of stuff going on, and the media is just constantly trying to keep us scared. And yet the reality of what's going on is not being reported. So we've got this weird combo of half terror, media-induced terror, and the real thing that's happening right in front of us, and we don't know about this, but we know that.
Gotcha.
So, yeah,
Gotcha.
Hey,
Gotcha.
Tom, with that being said, that'd be a good segue into our next clip
Okay.
to talk about how underrepresented violence in this country is really reported. So
Okay.
why don't we play clip 2 and talk about it?
Sounds good.
It's not just Buffalo. Just hours after that horror, Americans experienced at least 2 more mass shootings in 2 other cities. So far this year, there have been 201 mass shootings, and it's only May.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I saw those statistics when I was looking that up in preparation for this, and obviously this was a tragic event. I don't know what the exact statistics are right now on hate crimes, mass shooting hate crimes this year, but to say that there are 200 mass shootings, and I believe that's defined as maybe 3 or 4. I think 3 or 4 deaths is definitely alarming. But let me get back to Brother Trevillian. I'm hoping we can hear you now.
All right.
Yes. All right.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. It is difficult to watch what's going on because whether you look at the North or whether you look at the South, what you find out is that we are easy targets because oftentimes we have been placed into certain areas for city ordinance, and everybody knows where the other side of the tracks are. When you look at what was going on in Buffalo, that was a store which the local government had worked to put into a food desert. So it was a store that was serving an area that historically did not have access to fresh food. So it is easy to haunt us when we live in specific communities and when we're going to specific places to address our daily and regular needs. It is going to be important for us to work together as a community to move back to community policing principles, because this type of issue is only going to be addressed when the community is aware of who's coming in, what they're coming for, and whether we are working together or whether someone's coming in and basically surveilling us. It's important to recognize that our communities have been designed a certain way, and it's going to be important that we protect them a certain way as well.
So, Anton, as we talk to folks, families in particular, who are in communities, because quite frankly, this could have happened anywhere. It just happened to be in
Absolutely.
But it could have happened in Dallas. It could have happened in Austin. It could have happened in LA. It could have happened any place, quite frankly, because this guy drove 3 hours and he cased an area that he saw that was vulnerable. So let's be very clear.
Twice.
We've been here long enough to know that counting on a benevolent government, politician, or whomever has not quite worked well for the Black community over the years. Typically, everything that we have gained has come at the price of an assassination. On the most part, an assassination of one of our great leaders or someone within our community in order to gain that. So when we look at it from a grassroots level, organization perspective, where do we go? What do we do? How do we begin to take control of our communities to make them safer, to reduce, not eliminate? Because we understand that we're in a certain type of viral war.
Right, and I think, and I agree with everything that's been said. I think as we look at the landscape now, especially at a grassroots level, we have to look differently at how we look at security. How do we look at protecting our people? And I think that even not just organizations, but churches, places where you have large gatherings of Black people, we have to take the necessary steps to provide that next level of security and protection. Like here in Dallas, we've had some mass shootings in some communities, right? And so now the chief of Dallas, Chief Garcia, is proposing some policies that will require that type of security. Own organization, and we right in the community has looked at how we protect our company differently. You know, we install locks. We got armed security who work at our doors. And sad as it is, we have to begin to look at it like that. We have to begin. It's a lot of sick people. And the elephant in the room is, I like what the brother said earlier, this great replacement theory that's happening. And the elephant in the room is people like Tucker Carlson, who is, when they did some digging, found that this guy's rhetoric was tied to his ideology. And we have to start challenging that, because the question is, what can we do? We have to challenge people like the Tucker Carlsons of the world and those who spew this type of rhetoric, because the least informed, the least intelligent takes that kind of rhetoric and they act on it. And then media, to address your question with media, we know that media is in it for the click. They in it for the clickbait, for the views, for the this. And so we have to understand that, we have to really understand that. And then lastly, let me say this. I don't think that we've become numb as a country, evident by us being on Black Men Speak. I think what happens is there's a desire to show the violence. There's a desire to show this, as opposed to showing civilized conversations like this, as opposed to people who are talking rational. It's this whole bloodthirst thing that the media have on chaos and confusion and conflict, and like my other brother said, fear, that we need something that can challenge that. We need something where we're showing people that it's another view and it's another way to look at things. Because I think that, Tucker Carlson and those people like that, and I'm calling them by name, they drive this kind of fear and poor whites who feel that blacks are taking over, and that's not real. That's like collective illusion. If you read Todd Rose's new book, Collective Illusion, and he talk about how the loudest voices always seem as truth. So people, if they saying this stuff, then other people who are less informed believe that it's true. But when he did research, and I'll be quiet, we found that most people don't agree with those louder voices. They just assume everybody else does, so they do. But they truly don't believe with that. And we have to start challenging those kind of voices that's in our culture.
Let's talk about this, though. And this is going to be a multi-angled question that I believe all of you can address in some way. I believe there are some things that as a community we have to begin to do differently in order to protect our communities, in order to make it safe for everybody, and especially vulnerable communities like the ones that we've seen here. And so the question is, what do we have to ask for from ourselves? What do we have to ask for from our politicians? What do we have to demand, for instance, from our law enforcement communities? What should we be asking for from the pulpit? And everybody doesn't have the same answer, but there are things, if we're going to, God forbid, protect our grandmothers, and I love my grandmother or my aunt, but I just don't see them going out and packing. Now, she might need to have a firearm to protect herself if somebody tries to break in, but I just don't think she's just going to be rolling out packing. What do we need to ask for from these different communities in order to provide a more comprehensive approach to protecting our communities from idiots like this? And I'm sorry, I just had to say it. I'm going to start with Brother Hawthorne from a law enforcement perspective. Mark, I'm going to go to you just from a self-defense perspective, from the business community as well, Mr. O'Neill, Brother O'Neill, Jeff, from our legislators, and then from the church. Because, within the Black community, pretty much everything begins and ends with the church. Some of that is beginning to sway because of mass media, but all of it pulls together. So let's start with you, Brother Hawthorne. What is it that we have to do differently, and what do we have to lean on to our law enforcement community to?
Yeah, well, I think the brother who spoke before you, when he talked about some of the measures being put in place by, Chief Garcia, it really comes down to dialogue and having an understanding what parameters we need to have in place, maybe for large scale events, smaller events, permitting process. When I was at Arlington, we had a very aggressive permitting process for large scale events and smaller events. So that we were ensuring that we had the right security there, that we knew what was going on. In the shooting that he referenced, these were teenagers, a lot of kids out, unsupervised. The police had left. because their time was up. They weren't getting paid. And so, that's a failure or breakdown in the permitting system. Those kind of things should not ever happen. So I think from a law enforcement perspective, if we have those type of events and there's dialogue with the community on expectations and what we need to do to put measures in place to ensure that we minimize those kind of incidents, we should do those things. And I think the community, from what I've seen over my years in law enforcement, they embrace the measures that we want to do, but we have to have a conversation. They have to understand what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. And we can't come in and to a community and just try to impose our will, if you will, without some dialogue, so that we are sensitive to everything about our presence and how our presence might be perceived, so that it's truly a partnership, if you will. We're taking input from the community, and we're putting that input that we receive from them into our plan, and we're inviting them in to what we're doing into our operations, so that there's a lot of transparency in what we're doing. And the community has to perceive that we're there to protect them.
And that sounds good, but you got somebody out there that's saying, you know what, we're not being protected, we're being policed. In brief order, what can communities who feel that they're just being policed do? Because the folks they're being policed by aren't a part of their community.
Yeah. Well, I was a part of a conversation not long ago where we have to go to the community and we have to invite people into our ranks. The people who are our biggest critics, we got to bring them to the table. We have to bring them to the table and have dialogue with them and respect their perspective, respect their point of view just as much as we do anybody else. And so I think if we reach out and we go into the communities and actually have dialogue with them. I remember it was several years ago, I actually got invited to attend a meeting with the Black Panther Party because they wanted to know, what can we do? Specifically that. And so I wasn't afraid to go in there. I went in there. We had dialogue. We had a really good dialogue. They told me not to wear my uniform when I came, but they told me I was welcome. And they said, hey, we appreciate you coming to us and sitting down and breaking bread in our place, understanding what it is that we're looking for, and having a dialogue of how we can better work together.
That's good, because it's interesting. There came a time, even we look at some of the most difficult days, even pre-civil rights, where you had folks that I believe I was reading a while ago that the Nation of Islam, which was pro-advocate, obviously they were Muslim, but they were pro-black, and they sat down and had conversations with the Ku Klux Klan, but it was mutual respect.
Yeah.
Mark, you said something in one of our conversations that I thought was kind of provocative, because a lot of our Black and brown communities are vulnerable. But when you're dealing with issues like that, when someone is trying to suppress your community, suppress your voice, suppress your vote, which has historically been the narrative in the Black community, what are your thoughts on that in terms of how communities have to change in order to eliminate things like this from happening in the future?
Well, on an individual level, nobody is more concerned about your safety than you. And if you expect it to be somebody else's job, you're going in for a rude surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a balance there, because we can talk about this
now we're talking about it from a community perspective.
Right. Getting the community involved. I mentioned that my thoughts on gun control is that it is flat out racist from the get-go and has stayed such. And I mean, part of this is, yes, I think the community does need to take into consideration that it may end up being up to them to protect themselves. And that's a grassroots movement. That there was only one guy in that store who had a gun, and that was the security guard.
Right.
right? And this wacko came in with the plan specifically to target him and take him out first, right? So, the community starting to take care of itself and address issues that affect it, right, is really important, but it's not tolerating this stuff anymore.
So let me ask you to respond to a very brief question with a very brief answer. How does that community make sure that that don't happen again?
You can't. All you can do is limit the damage.
How do they do that?
And honestly, when it comes to active shooters, traditionally the answer has always been guns.
Otherwise, if they coming with it, they already know that somebody's going to be coming back at them.
Exactly.
Got it. So if we look at it from a business perspective, Charles, we understand that, and we've talked about this before, Jimmy, on several occasions. Black America, the most prolific consumers and spenders, probably in the, I don't want to say in the history of the world, but if not, pretty doggone close.
History of the world, Tom.
Exactly. And so the question then becomes, we give a lot. Unfortunately, we don't ask for very much, if anything, from the business communities, but they ultimately determine the outcome and the economics of our communities. What are we missing? Why are we missing it? And what is it that we need to demand? What discipline do we need to enforce?
I think, Tommy, I think I'll try to roll my answer into both hats, both the media hat and the business hat, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
Because I want to reference something that Jeff mentioned in his comment. And he casually, and I'm going to say casually, but in his remarks, he the top store in a food desert, right? And
Yes,
so
right.
back to your earlier question about how we've become numb, we talk about food deserts as if they're naturally occurring phenomena, but they're actually the results of somebody's actions to ensure that these communities were deprived. And so, and then buttress that with Jimmy's comment that we're the most prolific consumers. How is it possible that the most prolific consumers are deprived of outlets through which to do their consuming? And so again, we're back to answering the core question. The core question is political systems, economic systems have been devised expressly and unalterably result in conversations like this because of incidents like we saw in New York. So there's always this constant pressure on Black communities to explain. Mr. Lucky is known as an activist rather than a civic leader. James Hawthorne was the first Black police chief rather than a Black man who had risen through the ranks to the rank of chief in his department. Jeff Trevillian is an elected official in the capital county, Travis County in Texas. And I know that make sure that his colleague, Commissioner's Court, understand him. Rather than say, oh, this is a Black commissioner speaking. No, this is a guy who is elected to represent the constituency. So this is so critical that we control even the semantizations about how we talk about this. And so that's the media's role. And the media has this mainstream media. And so I'm from the Black press. And so I'm very, very, very careful about how we describe things that impact our community. Mainstream media does not have that same sense of responsibility to Black folk, and so they can characterize our responses any way they choose to, and have us either accept them or say, I don't accept and I reject it and I don't listen to Tucker Carlson anyway, right? And so the business response, and I saw something on Twitter today, there's this small conversation going on around a day of absence. And if you remember the play Day of Absence, when all the Black folk didn't go to work that day, there's this, we're going to do a national blackout. And we're all going to refrain from spending on May 19th, which is Malcolm X's birthday. So
tomorrow.
Those things, but they don't change things. And so the first thing that must change, and you have to excuse me and I'll be finished with this one, but Saint George Clinton in Parliament Funkadelic say, "Free your ass and your mind will free your mind and your ass." Right. So we gotta wake up first, unbuckle ourselves from all of the detritus, the constant barrage of propaganda that is challenging our clear thinking, and come to solutions that work for us, that are originated from us, rather than selling that you get from city leaders who say, "Wouldn't you like it if we had a police force that was more responsive?" And then we do the Pavlovian, yeah, that would be good, rather than offering solutions that emanate from our community.
Gotcha.
So Tom, before we move to the next question,
and Jimmy, I'd like to acknowledge the folks who have joined us on the chat line. I'd like to thank Brother Freddie Roberts, who has been on the line and a consummate supporter of what we're doing here. Of course, Edward Willis, who has been here before. We want to thank you for joining us tonight, Edward. And then Tyrone Burgess, we want to thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh,
and
Tyrone's in the house. Okay.
Absolutely, Jimmy. Go ahead, Jimmy.
So this is our last segment, our last 10 or 15 minutes.
Yes.
And we will be very remiss if we don't tackle the 800-pound gorilla in the show. So I'm going to play the next clip, and I would like to hear from our panelists on their views.
After 72 people were shot in one weekend in the city of Chicago, that city's mayor is calling for everyone there to work together.
And Jenna, that violent weekend is also shining a spotlight on another issue. And it's an issue some don't talk about. Who is killing these black victims? Not whites, not the police, but other blacks.
Okay, so we're talking about Chicago. We're probably talking about a lot of urban areas, a lot of major black communities in larger cities in the country. Now, I don't want to get off task on this specific conversation, but that is definitely an area that we have to address. We know that somewhere close to about 90% of fatalities, in the black community on black, and I think it's probably somewhere in the mid 80s within the white community are white on white crime, and that is an area that is part and parcel. Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about a few points off here and there.
But we can't excuse our high number. We can't excuse what we do by saying other people have equal numbers. I mean, I don't care if their number is 100%. 90% is still too high for us. According to the FBI, latest FBI stats, there are 200, on average, about 200 black deaths a day. We average now 10,000 homicides, black homicides a year. That's a lot of black people dying and being put into the grave. But I guess my issue is, how do you prioritize one person's death over another? We don't mourn, we don't get upset over 99% of black people dying. But we do get bothered and upset and worked up when it's a white person killing a black person or a white cop killing a black person.
And so the question is what, Jimmy?
The question is that death is death. If we're going to be bothered by death, we need to be bothered by it and work to eradicate it as best we can from our community. And then being so recalcitrant towards authority, not wanting to tell or be a snitch. This whole snitches end up in ditches or with stitches is not a good concept when you need to take violent people off the street, but no one wants to testify against them. That doesn't help that doesn't help our cause. But my point is that all death in our community should bother us, not just some.
You're correct.
So if you're going to get worked up and burn down your neighborhood because a white cop killed a black person, then be willing to have that same equal energy when it's a black person killing a black person.
And, to a large degree, Jimmy, there has been visibility to black on black crime. I mean, let's be very honest. We don't control the white media that determines what is relevant in America, what is relevant even in our community. And so that leads to a conversation that Charles was talking about in terms of the role of the black press. And, it's very interesting. You bring up a very valid point, but therein lies the next question. Who is controlling the narrative as to what is important in our community? And that's the other conversation that we have to have. And with the 10 minutes that we have left, I don't want to completely change the narrative of this conversation, but I think that's definitely something that we have to talk about, which means we have to own our own issues. We cannot wait on other folks to own those issues. Now,
Well, why don't we have our guests respond to whether these 8 people, black people who died, I mean, 10 total, was 2 white people also, but these
mhm,
8 people, their death is any more significant than the other mass shootings that took place that same day?
when you say more
Now,
relevant, I don't understand your question.
now I understand. Let me try to frame it like this, Tommy.
Okay.
I get his point exactly. I
Okay.
get his point. I don't think know that there's any death that weighs more than the other. One is driven by racial animus. One is driven by ignorance and availability of firearms. And until there's a real, sincere conversation about the proliferation, the availability of firearms in a community that does not manufacture, and I've been looking for 3 years for a black gun manufacturer. There are none.
No,
Back
there are
to our
none.
consumerism, Jimmy. Back to our consumers. So something is making this supply of firearms available in black communities at a rate far out of proportion to anything else that's available in our community. That's one. So until we as a group decide that one of the things that is causing this black homicide is the availability of firearms, then we need to about that. One of the things
Right.
we can do, and if we're going to do a blackout, I'm all for doing a blackout on black folk buying firearms. That would be cool with me, except for the fact then that it would be this little cat from Buffalo the Hood because he knows we unarmed, right? So this dichotomy, this really conundrum that we're in.
Perspective, I don't think it.
Well, I think that we have to make sure that.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Relevant, but about wait. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You break it up, Tom.
All right, Mark.
Well,
you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I just think that it's going to be really important for us to begin to talk again to African American institutions. What we try to do regularly and what we started doing again systematically was talking to churches, was talking to fraternities and sororities, neighborhood associations, and folks that do business in the community, and to tell them, you need to come to city council meeting. You need to come to the county commissioners meeting and ask us for what it is you need. We have been pushing that every Title I school have an after school program in it. So from 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock, you have an opportunity to get a tutor to help you with your homework, get a third meal, and then use that school as a community center because it is the most expensive building in your neighborhood.
True.
You pay 75% of your taxes keeping your public schools open. Those ought to be community centers for you all the time. We are working with the Capital Area Food Bank to make our Title I schools, which have 60% or more of the kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch, to use them as food pantries, to put food there so that families can get to it regularly, not just when a flood happens, just when a storm happens. We should be working with communities and making sure that dollars are proportionately used in the communities that they are extracted from. This is only going to happen when we work together, build an agenda, and come down and ask for it, because everybody else comes down to ask for it. And until we do, we're going to get what we've always gotten, which is not our fair share.
Right. That's correct.
All righty. I am back, Jimmy. I think my internet was off for a couple of seconds, so I may have missed a couple of things, but we're probably at a point, Jimmy, where we're going to have to have some, we're going to have
rapid fire
closing comments. There we go. Rapid fire closing comments. If we can keep it 30 seconds, I believe that gives everyone an opportunity, and then we will close out this show. We will start with Brother Dr. J. Augustine.
Hey, closing comments. I am all about the institutions that Brother Trevillian referenced. I'm all about collaboration. I believe the church is a place of collaboration, especially in the Black community. So if it means bringing fraternities and sororities, other civic groups together, if it means mobilizing to attend school board meetings, to attend county commissioner meetings, whatever that case is, the church is a proven institution that people trust. It's a place where we should come together to have our collective voices molded and brought together and go before public bodies. That's part of the prophetic leadership that the church has always offered in the past. It's part of the prophetic leadership the church has got to offer now.
And tell us about your book. And tell us about your book that's coming out.
Thank you so much. The book is out. Yes. Called to Reconciliation: How the Church Can Model Justice, Diversity, and Inclusion was published February 8th by Baker Academic Press. Called to Reconciliation: How the Church Can Model Justice, Diversity, and Inclusion. And thank you for the prompt.
And it can be purchased where?
Anywhere books are sold. If it's most convenient to get it on Amazon, Call to Reconciliation, but anywhere books are sold. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, anywhere books are sold.
Okay, Anton Lucky, your closing comments, and if you could also tell us about your book as well.
Yes, my closing comments are that I believe that we're talking about violence in our communities, which I've had 22 years working in communities. I will just close with this. There are approximately 600,000 men who are coming back into our community almost each month from prison, right? And who have proximity to kids. We got to understand that a lot of these kids are growing up in single parent households, no men, no mentors, because oftentimes we shun away from those young people, right? And they don't have mentors, so they resentful in prison, exchange relationships. By the time they get 13 or 14, nobody told them they love them. They ain't had proper healthy relationships, you know, so they non-empathetic. And so once they get 18, 17, they get an AK in their hand, they ready to kill anybody in sight because they don't have those feelings. And so what we do at our organization, we try to repurpose those men who are coming out of prison, those men that's in communities. We try to show them that if they carry, then their characteristics have a market advantage in this economy, that you can become the big brother, big sister to young people who need that kind of guidance, because you are the ones who can show them how to navigate that terrain. And so our organization work to do just that.
In your book?
And my book is called, it just was released yesterday, and it's called A Redemptive Path Forward from Incarceration to a Life of Activism, and it chronicles my journey with Bishop Omar Jawar, the late great Bishop Omar Jawar, in terms of working in communities. So you can pick it up anywhere. Amazon.
Wow. Good
Thank
deal.
you.
Okay. Mark McYoung, closing comments.
I'd like to address the issue of black on black crime.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
It's not that big of an issue. The problem is criminal on criminal. When you're talking, that goes across all races.
Mm-hmm.
When you got people killing each other, odds are they're involved in criminal lifestyles, right? So what you have is a predatory and armed criminal class out there. And addressing men coming out of prison and then teaching them to help young people to keep from following path, that is a wonderful idea. The church, excellent. But understand, it's criminal. It's not necessarily skin color.
All right, there we go. Thank you very much. And Brother James Hawthorne, closing comments.
Well, I think, from a police standpoint, we have to meet the community where they are. We have to meet the activists, the people who are marginalized, or the people who are not always at the table. It's always the school boards and the fraternity members and those people who have access, but we got to meet the people who don't necessarily have access and who don't have a voice. And we have to go to them. We have to bring them to the table and make them a part of the equation. And like the man just said, oftentimes from my perspective, I mean, he's exactly right. It's criminal on criminal. And once we get the community involved and really meet them and understand, build a relationship so that we can get information to eradicate that element out of the community, they're all for that. Nobody wants to live in a community where there's crime taking place. And so we have to make ourselves available to them and meet them where they are, understand what those issues are, and help them to help us remove that element from their communities. And we can't do that by sitting at our desk waiting on them to knock on the door, come down to the police station. That just ain't gonna happen.
There you go. We just got a chat here. Jesus didn't discuss the blind man's issue. He put mud on his eyes. We have to act. All right, Brother Trevillian, what do you say? It looks like we may have an audio issue, Brother Trevillian. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
There we go.
I had muted myself. All right. Well, it's important to recognize that the things that we're talking about doing have been done before and in our community and with a lot less resources. I think a lot of people have grown up not understanding the sacrifice that is necessary to build community. And we have to sow in community and we have to work with community, and we can't leave the places that taught us how to be successful. I was taught how to work by my grandparents. I was taught what to do in class by my parents who were teachers. I was challenged by my peers to be a good ball player. It is important that we know that everything that we need, we do have access to. And we have been successful even with less than what we have now. So it is imperative for us,
Yes.
for those who have wisdom and for those who have understanding, to reach back and make sure that we're bringing people with us, that we are making sure that our children and our nieces and our nephews are doing things that we had to do because they were the right things to do. They weren't necessarily popular. It's important to recognize there's a right way and there's a wrong way, and that we do the right things ourselves, but also that we demand fairness and we speak the truth to power, and we go into the public circles and ask for those things that we deserve because we are taxpayers too.
Charles O'Neill, what say you?
I'll say that unlike my co-panelists here, I have not written a book, but I do have some recommendations for you. 1804 Right. The
What is that?
Exclusion of African Americans in a White Man's Land. Buy that. It's really, really rare, but find it. You'll find the secrets to two white professors, law school professors, that have unearthed the secrets to this discord that we find. This one's an old one. Two nations, black and white, separate, unequal, separate, hostile, and unequal. Professor Hocker lost his job at NYU over that book. And finally, The Bible for Black Folk, The Black Power Imperative.
Yes.
A moral, political, and economic imperative for the 21st century, Dr. Amos Wilson. Get them and put them in your library, digest them, internalize them, and then next week, I'll have my book ready for you.
Okay.
Absolutely. Jimmy, we have somehow gotten in a lot in an hour.
We did.
With our most August. I want to thank everyone for being here. This is not our last conversation. Obviously, a few of you have been here before, and we expect to have all you guys back in the near future because we still have a lot to talk about. But more importantly, we have a lot to do as a community. So I want to thank each of you for what you have done for our listeners so that they know what they need to do.
And Tom, let me say this.
Yes.
You don't have to wait for us to invite you on the show. If any of you guys have anything going on that you want to talk about, reach out to us and we'll plan a special episode for you if we have to. So stay in touch with us.
Absolutely. So before we close, and I think I warned him before that, we're going to have Reverend Dr. G. Augustine to give us a brief closing prayer, and then we will close tonight's show out. Is that okay, Jimmy? Do we have time for that?
Which brother are we targeting?
Dr. Augustine is going to give us a closing prayer.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Of course, I'm going to defer to him on our closing prayer. Okay, you are on mute, I believe.
Yes,
I've been.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, let's take a moment to go before the Lord. Heads are bowed and eyes are closed. Precious and wonderful God, we come before you recognizing that our assembling tonight was not planned in advance. Our assembly tonight, dear God, was a reaction to hate. We come before you because we recognize that hate is real, but we also, dear God, know that love is real. We recognize that hate cannot drive out hate. We know that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can drive out darkness, and only love, dear God, can drive out hate. So as we pray for humanity, as we pray for the families that have been adversely affected by white racism and by hate in America, we pray, dear God, that you will open our hearts and open our minds and allow us to embrace love and to grow stronger and to grow closer to you. We pray for every respective family represented here tonight. We pray for our country. We pray for the state of affairs, for our government. We pray, dear God, you will use us as your hand-chosen instruments to bring goodness to other people's lives. And please fill us with love so that we may be vessels of love and show love to others. This is our prayer. as we depart this virtual space, but never from your holy presence. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jimmy. I'll let you close it.